right. I feel like playing some bass today. You think I should play some bass today? I think I'll play some bass today. You see this? This is my boomstick.
See this? This is my boomstick.
This is a brand that you guys have been wanting me to try out for a long time, and Sonicake has been trying to get me to review their equipment for a long time. Now, Sonicake markets this pedal as your one-stop bass effects solution, okay? It's got a preamp with a 3-band EQ and a gain stage. It's got fuzz for your overdrive and distortion tone, a boost/compressor, and an octave pedal. Now, in addition to this, it does have an XLR out, so it can be used as a DI. And if this thing does all it claims to do, then there's no reason for me to bring a Sansamp, Spectre Comp, or XVI to a gig ever again. Now, these three pedals together total up to about $400 or $500. So in theory, this thing should be able to do everything those three pedals can do, but for a street price of about 99 bucks.
In theory, communism works.
But to find out if this thing can actually replace those three pedals, we're gonna have to take a stroll down Boom Avenue.
Here comes the ready and now. How you like me now?
Here's to you guys. By the way, this video is sponsored by YINYOO Audio. More about them later. Starting with the EQ, which they call preamp here, and is actually probably more accurate because it does include a gain stage, which is very usable. But it does have a 3-band EQ, and they claim that they modeled this preamp after the vintage Ampeg tone. I gotta say, this thing comes pretty darn close to that classic high gain, aggressive Ampeg tone. Okay, the bass frequency is perfectly nailed. The mid-range frequency is sweet. It is probably the sweetest mid-range frequency that I've heard in a preamp pedal. And then the treble, you gotta be careful how much you use because it does get a little bit messy. You start hearing a lot more fret noise. And with the mid-range being as aggressive as it is, it's really exaggerated. So you kinda gotta pick one or the other. Now I'm gonna show you just a raw sound clip of this bass without any EQ on it, back to back with this EQ so you can see how much character it brings in. Like I said, doesn't that mid-range frequency sound so sweet? Okay, I gotta say, this thing for 99 bucks, just the preamp stage alone is worth that price. I mean, I think that this honestly blows my Sansamp out of the water as far as the tone that I get out of it. Pair that with the fact that it's got a direct XLR out, I really don't see any reason that I need to be bringing my Sansamp to a gig anymore. And that's saying a lot because I have gigged with my Sansamp for well over a decade, and I always use that thing. I thought that it's some of the best designed analog circuitry around. And for this thing to come in and take the cake at less than $100 is honestly just mind-blowing. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these other effects. Moving on to my next most used effect on a gig, compression. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave that EQ on because it sounds so good, and I'll just demo for you back and forth between no compression and with compression. Now, a lot of people say that playing with compression is a crutch and it can actually make you a more sloppy player in the long run, and I can understand and appreciate where they're coming from, and I do think that when you're practicing, you should practice without compression. But what I always say is only use compression on the gigs that you want to be asked back to. I call it my suck less pedal, okay? It just really evens that out, and it's especially noticeable when you're playing with a pick. Check this out. Okay, see how it just kind of evened up the dynamics a bit and cleaned up the sound? That's what compression is for. It essentially makes you sound like you're a better player than you actually are. And here's how the compression sounds when you're slapping. Gotta be honest with you guys. I'm really disappointed with how this sounds with slapping. Okay, compression should not sound that bad. This thing is just way too heavy, and I was even running it on the lowest compression setting. I really have a love-hate relationship with this compressor because it sounds so good for fingers and for picking, and it sounds so bad for slapping, and I feel like that's where you need it the most. And that's one of the things that I really love about this TC Spectre Comp is that this thing just sings with any style of playing or any style of music. You can always dial in just the perfect amount of compression. It's super simple, just one little knob to just dial in how much, I don't know what kind of crazy wizard magic is inside this thing, but it is killer. Now, that being said, this thing literally costs the exact same as this entire thing. And like I said, this compression works really well for fingers and picking style playing. But all that being said, I gotta say, as good as the compression sounds for fingers and picking, I'm just a little disappointed. But before we look at the two effects that I know you guys are dying to hear, the fuzz and the octave, let's hear a word from our sponsor. Like I mentioned before, this episode is brought to you by YINYOO Audio, and these are the Q70 wireless Bluetooth earbuds. Now, they are very obviously trying to compete with Apple's AirPods, which I am a fan of and a daily user. You guys know that a pair of Apple AirPods will run you about $179. These will run you about $39. And while Apple AirPods are non-sound isolating, these actually are with 3 sizes of included silicone tips. Now, these are brand new. These weren't out when I purchased my Apple AirPods, and I really wish that they were because they have the same thing. They charge inside their case. You pop it open. It just said power on, connected. Okay, audible feedback, and it's automatically connecting to my phone without having to go into my Bluetooth settings and select it. The sound quality of these versus my AirPods, it really is a no-brainer. I mean, these blow the sound quality out of the water. I think they're awesome. I think for $39, they're a no-brainer. I was thinking about upgrading to AirPods Pro, and when you can get these for $39, I just can't justify spending that much money. All right, let's turn back on to Boom Ave. Now, the fuzz effect on this thing can get really fuzzy, and it's pretty cool, but I personally like just a light overdrive on bass tone. I actually found that my favorite overdrive tone doesn't necessarily come from the fuzz effect, but actually comes from the preamp effect, okay? If you crank up the gain, turn down the volume, and make sure that you still have that sweet mid-range cranked, you get a really awesome, again, sort of a vintage Ampeg overdrive tone. Now on the fudge effect, stop laughing at me, the fudge effect. Now the fuzz effect, if I turn the sustain all the way down and the tone just a little bit past noon, I can get a very similar tone, but it still is just a little bit more fuzzy. And if you crank that sustain up higher, it gets really fuzzy, almost like a muff sort of a tone. Now, one thing that I did find out about the fuzz and the preamp effects is that they don't necessarily work together as a team very well, okay? If I'm using the preamp, even not as an overdrive, just as an EQ, and I turn on the fuzz, it gets way oversaturated way too quick. Honestly, like I said, I'm probably more apt to just use the preamp as my overdrive just because I think that tone is really sweet. But if I wanted to get a little bit fuzzier, I probably would just click both at the same time, and that would turn off the EQ, turn on the fuzz, and then I would just use the little volumes on each effect to balance it out so that there's no drop in volume. Speaking of the little volume knobs and all the knobs on here, one thing that I wanted to mention earlier is that I love that they are clear so that when you turn the effect on, it lights up, it looks really cool. But one thing that I don't love are these tiny little tick marks. Once you turn that on a dark stage and these things glowing bright, you actually can't see the little tick marks. So you don't really know exactly where on the scale you've dialed it. So on a dark stage, you really just have to use your ears when you're dialing this stuff in because there's no way you're going to be able to see that with it backlit with the effects on. Now, the effect on this thing that I was perhaps the most excited to try was actually the Octave, okay? I don't play with a whole lot of bass effects, okay? EQ, compression, and a slight touch of overdrive, pretty much all I ever play with. But if I do play with an effect, it's Octave because it really thickens up the sound. It sounds really cool. But there are very few pedals, especially bass pedals, that can do it well. And this particular Octave pedal has a dry Octave 1 and Octave 2. Now your dry signal is just whatever octave you are playing with. Octave 1 is 1 octave below 8 VB, or Ottava Bassa, as no one ever calls it. And Octave 2, instead of being an octave above 8 VA, is actually 2 octaves below 15 MB, or Quindísima Bassa, as no one ever calls it. And that's really weird to me. I think as a bass player, I would prefer to actually have an octave below and an octave up because I don't always necessarily want to be playing above the 12th fret all the time. Now, that being said, listen to how this thing sounds. Now, my favorite sound is with the dry cranked all the way, Octave 1 cranked all the way, and Octave 2 cranked halfway. Now, doesn't that thing just sound so thick? I love it. And if you solo just Octave 1, let's hear that again. It's so cool. It sounds like a sort of like an old Moog like synth bass. It's really an awesome usable tone. Really thick, really bassy. I know oftentimes when you do a lower octave, it sounds lower, but it doesn't actually fill in those low frequencies, and this sub octave really does. Now, the 2 octaves below, like I said, if you use it subtly, it can kind of fill in a little bit more sound and thicken it up a little bit, but that Octave 1, it sounds so cool. Okay, one more time, let's hear it again. So cool! So does this replace the XVI, which is actually not even a bass pedal, it's a guitar pedal that I've repurposed for bass because it's the only octave pedal that I actually think sounds good with bass? Well, this thing has a lower octave and a higher octave, so if I want to be able to play with a higher octave, this is probably the one I'd have to use. But I gotta say, the tracking on the Boom Avenue blows the XVI out of the water, okay? This thing, I can't hear any noticeable latency, and like I said, they just fill out really thick. You can tell that this thing was definitely designed for bass because those sub-octaves are enormous. Now, I do miss having the upper octaves, so does it replace the XVI entirely? Oh, I'm getting blown out again, shoot. Stupid sun, I wish you would make up your mind if you want to be cloudy or sunny today. It's Okay, much better. So, does it replace the XVI? While it tracks better and the lower octave sound better, I do miss that upper octave, so I don't know that it can replace it completely. I think it will just matter which gig I'm on and what I'm trying to play. Honestly, for less than $100, I am absolutely blown away. And like I said, no need for me to carry a Sansamp anymore. The preamp stage, I think, blows it out of the water. I think that in and of itself makes this an excellent value. Plus, you get these other effects that, again, are really awesome if you use them properly. And Sonicake, I think I'm going to try out some more multi-effects pedals. I mean, this thing, for the money, sounds awesome. I did not expect this. I did not expect this. So why don't you guys let me know in the comments, have a look at Sonicake's website and look at some of their guitar multi-effects pedals and let me know which ones you'd like to review because I know they're itching to send me some more. So let me know which ones you want to see me review and I'll probably also end up giving it away. So if there's one specifically that you want me to give away, let me know in the comments. Check out this playlist right here if you want to see more awesome budget guitar and bass effects. I'm Dan, this is Guns and Guitars. I'll see you in that next video.